Cale Bremore was the boy no one noticed, silent in class, invisible in the halls, forgotten by teachers and ignored by peers. Detective Soraya Klein was the one person who refused to look away. When a quiet town was shattered by a brutal school massacre, their paths collided in a chilling game of cat and mouse, one driven by obsession, the other by a desire to vanish without a trace. What no one knew was that the killer was already among them, and he thought he'd committed the perfect crime, until the day he realized he'd been captured all along. In the quiet town of Westridge Falls, life moved slowly. With tree-lined streets, a single traffic light, and a high school that hadn't changed in 30 years. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. Among its 7,000 residents was 17-year-old Cale Bremore, a boy who rarely spoke, rarely smiled, and somehow blended into the background so effortlessly that most people forgot he was even there. He walked the halls of Westridge High with his shoulders slightly hunched, his hoodie up even on warm days, and a pair of worn-out headphones almost glued to his ears. Teachers marked him present, but hardly ever heard his voice. Other students gave him sideways glances, called him creepy behind his back, but no one ever really bothered him, not in the way that left bruises or black eyes. It was more like everyone instinctively avoided him, like he carried a coldness they didn't want to catch. Kyle lived with his mother and stepfather in a narrow, aging house near the edge of town. His room was in the attic, a space he'd turned into his private world. Up there, surrounded by thick walls and dusty rafters, Cale was someone else. The boy who never raised his hand in class was building something dangerous in silence. His notebooks, filled with tightly packed handwriting and strange diagrams, weren't for school. They were blueprints, pages of hand-drawn maps of the high school, escape routes, and gear checklists. Everything was labeled with precise times, dates, and measurements. There were calculations for how long it would take security to respond, and which exits were likely to be blocked during a panic. He had studied human behavior like a scientist. During lunch hours, he sat alone near the rear courtyard, not out of habit, but for observation. He watched how students moved, who they spoke to, who traveled in groups and who didn't. He took notes. He made charts. He noticed things no one else did. A broken camera near the rear entrance, a janitor who always left the maintenance door open while smoking, a student council meeting that pulled most staff into one wing of the building on Thursdays. No. One questioned why Cale never smiled in yearbook photos or why his browser history was always wiped clean. He had learned how to stay invisible, not just unnoticed, but forgotten. Online, however, Cale was far from invisible. He was a known figure in obscure, encrypted forums, hidden corners of the internet where users gathered to discuss weapons, plans, and manifestos. Cale's screen name was Lucid Zero. He was respected there, admired even, not because of what he had done, but because of what he promised to do. He posted just enough to keep people intrigued, but never enough to be traced. He spoke in riddles, in codes, and shared digital images that hinted at blueprints. When others posted fantasies, he posted logic, cold, structured steps. His parents didn't notice the locked safe under his bed, or the growing stack of suspicious deliveries marked electronics. They believed he was just a withdrawn teenager, someone who preferred solitude over parties. He was quiet, yes, but not dangerous. That's what they told themselves. Kyle had no friends, no mentors, no girlfriend. But he didn't care. He believed that emotions were weaknesses, that connections slowed people down. His heroes weren't athletes or musicians. They were outliers, people who made headlines for the worst reasons. People who, in his mind, broke the rules and made the world listen. In his attic room, Kyle had a wall covered in newspaper clippings, not just from this country, but from across the world. Incidents involving lone attackers, school tragedies, and terror acts. He studied the language used in media, the patterns of public reaction. He believed that all of it was predictable, manipulatable, controllable. And so, he waited. Each day, he sharpened the edges of his plan. Each week, he tested a new piece of gear. To Cale, this wasn't about rage or revenge. It was about precision. He saw himself as the conductor of a dark symphony. Every note planned, every scream counted. No one in Westridge Falls suspected that the quiet teen with empty eyes and frayed notebooks was preparing to change the town forever, and by the time they noticed him, it would already be too late. It was Thursday morning in Westridge Falls, and the high school buzzed with excitement. The gym had been transformed overnight into a space filled with folding tables, colorful banners, and neatly arranged science projects. Parents arrived early, holding coffee cups and chatting with teachers. Students moved in packs, showing off their work, laughing and enjoying the change in routine. The science fair was one of the biggest events of the year. It brought everyone together, students from every grade, faculty, local reporters, and school board members. The gymnasium was at maximum capacity by 9:30 a.m., the kind of crowd that filled every corner and created the perfect storm of distraction. Cale Brymore had picked this day for a reason. For months, he'd studied the school calendar, monitoring attendance records and scheduling patterns. He knew exactly where each staff member would be during the event. He knew the security cameras were set to cycle in 90-second intervals, leaving brief windows of invisibility. He knew the rear gym entrance had a mechanical flaw. If you pulled hard enough in just the right spot, the lock gave out. At 9:41 a.m., Kyle approached the rear entrance, dressed like any other student. A plain gray hoodie, dark jeans, and a large black duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He moved quickly, but without panic. The door gave way after a brief pull, and he slipped inside unnoticed. Inside the bag were 2 weapons he had modified over months in his attic, lightweight, compact, and devastatingly efficient. There was also a gas mask, earplugs, a backup battery pack for his phone, and a flash drive containing a long, detailed manifesto. Cale didn't hesitate. His steps were precise as he walked through the narrow hallway that connected the locker rooms to the main gym. The echo of his footsteps was drowned out by the noise of laughter, announcements, and music coming from inside. He paused once to check his watch. Everything was on schedule. At 9:44 a.m., Cale stepped into the gym through a side door and opened fire. The sound was deafening. Panic swept across the room like a tidal wave. Students ducked, screamed, and trampled over one another in a rush to escape. Tables overturned, projects smashed to the ground, and the air filled with smoke and fear. Within 90 seconds, 9 people were dead. 3 teachers, 5 students, and 1 parent. The rest scattered in every direction, many injuring themselves, while trying to flee. Cale didn't shout. He didn't speak. He moved with chilling calm, avoiding security guards who were only just reacting. He circled the room once, checking corners, making sure no one was following. And then, just like that, he vanished. Police arrived in minutes, but by the time they entered the gym, Cale was already gone. He had exited through the east stairwell, where he had previously unscrewed a fire door latch during a weekend open house event. Outside, he ditched his hoodie and backpack behind the maintenance shed and changed into a school janitor's uniform he had stolen months earlier. He walked away from the chaos without being stopped, blending into the growing crowd of emergency responders and bystanders. News of the massacre broke within the hour. Helicopters filled the skies. The school was locked down, the town placed on alert, and a manhunt began. But there was no suspect photo, no motive. No one had seen his face. Cale returned to his house before noon, entering through the basement, and slipping up to his attic unnoticed. He sat down at his desk, logged into the same forum where he had once posted anonymous messages, and typed only one sentence. The silence was beautiful. He believed he had done something extraordinary, something that couldn't be erased. He believed he had stepped outside the world and rewritten his place in it. He watched the news with dry eyes, listening to the anchor struggle to make sense of what had happened. Westridge Falls would never be the same. And Cale Brymore, the boy no one remembered, was now the most wanted person in the state. But in that moment, sitting alone in his attic, he didn't feel like a fugitive. He felt like a ghost. The entire town of Westridge Falls was locked in fear. Police blocked off roads, helicopters scanned the forests, and residents stayed indoors, whispering prayers and theories. The massacre had left a permanent scar. The gym, once filled with science projects and laughter, had turned into a crime. Scenes soaked in grief. 9 lives lost. Countless more shattered. But the worst part wasn't just the brutality. It was the fact that no one knew who had done it. Investigators struggled. Surveillance footage from the school was compromised. Cameras had either been damaged or were cycling when it mattered most. Eyewitness accounts conflicted. Some claimed the shooter was a tall male in dark clothing. Others said it was someone wearing a mask. No one got a clear look. Panic had clouded everything. Local authorities were desperate. They formed a task force and called in help from the state. But the case was cold within days. There were no fingerprints, no shell casings, no known motive. Only fragments. The media named the shooter the Ghost of Westridge, and rumors began to spread. Some said the killer had fled the state. Others believed he was hiding in plain sight. That's when Detective Renna Quade was brought in. A cybercrimes expert known for cracking online criminal networks, she didn't care about the noise. She looked at patterns. She believed that no one acted alone in a vacuum, not even mass killers. There were always signs, digital trails, and Cale Brymore, though meticulous, had left more behind than he realized. She started with the manifesto. A local news channel had received a flash drive by mail 2 days after the shooting. It was untraceable, no return address, no fingerprints. But its contents were chilling. A 92-page document written by someone who called himself Lucid Zero. It was filled with cold philosophy, logistical breakdowns, and eerie reflections on violence and silence. The author believed he was beyond consequence. Renna focused on the language. Every paragraph was crafted with extreme care, but certain phrases repeated. Phrases she had seen before in encrypted forums known to host extremist content. She accessed old archives, diving deep into a part of the internet most never see. There she found it, a user named Lucid Zero, who had been posting for over a year, sharing complex maps and theories on human behavior. Most users were anonymous. Noise, but Lucid Zero was something else, organized, strategic, and dangerous. Renna traced the timestamps of the posts, comparing them with known school events. One post discussing exit routes appeared just hours after a school open house at Westridge High. Another post mentioned the exact weight capacity of a gym bleacher, information not publicly available but present in building blueprints. Someone had access. She obtained a list of all students with disciplinary records related to trespassing or unusual activity. The list was long, but most names were easily ruled out. Only one stood out, Cale Brymore. No direct red flags, but a history of unexplained absences, a reclusive nature, and access to restricted school areas through a part-time job with the janitorial crew. He had never been a suspect before. No one had even remembered him. Curious, she pulled his school records, internet history, and library checkout logs. Everything looked ordinary, until she found a library request for a book on network encryption and psychological profiling. The request had been placed months before the shooting. Renna also discovered that his school-issued laptop had been wiped clean 2 days after the massacre, even though he hadn't returned to school. Then came the breakthrough. A traffic camera 5 miles outside Westridge had captured someone walking through a back trail wearing a janitor's uniform just hours after the shooting. The photo was grainy, but image enhancement revealed a detail. On the shoulder strap was a faint embroidered patch with Cale's last name, partially visible. It wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was enough to start surveillance. Cale Brymore, the quiet ghost of Westridge High, was no longer invisible. He had left behind a trail, and Soraya Klein was going to follow it, no matter how deep it went. Cale Brymore had no idea he was being watched. In his mind, the plan had been flawless. He had disappeared without a trace, left behind chaos, and returned to his life of silence as if nothing had happened. Each day, he played the part of the isolated teen who rarely spoke, who never raised suspicion. But while the town mourned and the media speculated, something had shifted. Beneath the surface, eyes were on him. Detective Soraya Klein had ordered a full surveillance operation. Cale's online activity, his phone signals, his physical movements, all monitored in secret. Cameras were discreetly placed on lampposts outside his home and along the street leading to Westridge High. Plainclothes officers observed him from unmarked vehicles. He still lived his life in isolation, but the illusion of control was slipping. What Cale didn't know was that the manifesto, his masterpiece, had become his greatest weakness. Soraya had shared it with a team of linguistic analysts who mapped sentence structures, writing cadence, and vocabulary choices. Those patterns were matched against dozens of local school assignments, blog posts, and digital forums. The results pointed to one student with 87% accuracy, Cale Brymore. Still, without hard evidence, they couldn't make an arrest. Soraya knew that confronting him too early would only push him deeper into hiding, or worse, spark a second attack. So they waited, they studied, and they watched. Meanwhile, Cale had started building something new. His first plan had brought chaos, but the attention it gained online wasn't enough. He believed the public was too distracted, too numb. The why? News cycle had moved on faster than he expected. He needed something bigger, something they couldn't ignore. In his attic, a new set of sketches began to take shape. He had started working with chemicals, items ordered in pieces from different vendors, paid with untraceable gift cards. He downloaded schematics for pressure devices and studied airport security systems. The next act, in his mind, would be surgical, not explosive. Something that wouldn't just create noise but rewrite the national conversation. He began rehearsing again, slipping out at night, taking photos of nearby government buildings, mapping routes between subway terminals. He thought he was alone in his darkness, but Soraya's team had caught everything. Every GPS ping, every strange purchase, every trail of encrypted traffic. They were watching a predator dig his second trap, and this time, they were closing in. Then came the critical moment. Cale used a public library computer to upload a test file to a foreign server. The file was disguised as a spreadsheet, but embedded inside was a video clip, footage from the massacre, recorded from his own body cam. It was only 7 seconds long, but the horror in those frames was unmistakable. Soraya's team intercepted the upload before it could go live. That was all she needed. The next morning, Kyle walked to the corner store as usual. He picked up a snack, scanned the newspaper headlines about foreign conflicts and politics, and returned home. As he stepped onto the porch, he noticed the birds had gone quiet. Then the sound of heavy boots, unmarked vans, a click from behind. Before he could turn, he was tackled to the ground. Officers in tactical gear surrounded him, hands pressed against his back, his face shoved into the wooden porch. He didn't scream. He didn't ask why. His mind froze not in fear, but in confusion. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. He had planned for every possibility, except this one. Inside the house, officers stormed the attic. They found Blueprints, explosives in early stages, coded journals, and a second manifesto. Everything Cale had hidden now lay open under fluorescent lights and latex gloves. His mother screamed in disbelief, unable to understand how the quiet boy upstairs had been building a war. Cale was dragged into the back of a black SUV. The last thing he saw before the door shut was a glimpse of Detective Soraya Klein standing. At the edge of the driveway, her arms crossed, her eyes locked on his, and in that moment, Cale Bremore finally understood he hadn't escaped. The arrest of Cale Bremore shocked the nation. The boy who had remained invisible in hallways and blended into the background of yearbook photos was now the face of one of the deadliest school shootings in state history. His capture dominated headlines, sparking national debates about mental health, online radicalization, and the dark corners of youth that no one sees until it's too late. Inside the Westridge County Detention Facility, Cale was placed in a high-security unit, isolated from other inmates. The authorities feared he might try to harm himself, or worse, inspire others. The boy who had once orchestrated chaos with calm precision now sat alone in a gray concrete cell, stripped of everything he once controlled. Interrogations began immediately, but Cale refused to speak. He stared through the officers, blinking, slowly, his face unreadable. Psychiatrists were brought in to evaluate him, trying to peel back the layers of silence and see what lay beneath. Some said he was a sociopath. Others believed he was delusional, clinging to a fantasy of intellectual superiority and detachment from human emotion. Detective Soraya Klein watched it all unfold from behind the glass of the observation room. For weeks, she had hunted him. Now she had him, but the answers still felt out of reach. What drove a boy like Cale to transform into a ghost with a gun? What had broken him? Then, one evening, a prison guard logged an unusual event. Cale had written a message on his cell wall using a piece of plastic from his food tray. 5 words, scratched into the paint. "I thought I was dreaming." Soraya read the message and saw it not as a confession but as a window into the fractured reality of a mind that had convinced itself its crimes were somehow unreal. Cale hadn't just committed violence, he had rewritten his own moral code to justify it. The prosecution moved swiftly. The evidence was overwhelming. Digital footprints, handwritten plans, the manifesto, the video clip, and the testimony of forensic experts painted an airtight case. Public outrage grew by the day. Parents of the victims demanded justice. Candlelight vigils turned into marches. People wanted not just conviction, they wanted explanation. But Cale never gave it. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed. Journalists from across the country filled the seats. Photographers captured Cale in his orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, eyes vacant. He barely reacted as each charge was read aloud: 9 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of attempted murder, illegal possession of firearms, conspiracy to commit acts of terrorism. The charges carried the possibility of life without parole. The jury took less than 4 hours to reach a verdict: guilty on all counts. As the sentence was announced, a hush fell over the room. Cale remained still. Not a twitch, not a breath of protest. It was as if he had accepted this outcome long before the gavel fell. For the first time since the massacre, the people of Westridge Falls felt something like closure, but not peace. In the aftermath, new questions rose. How had no one seen the signs? Why had the school system, the community, and even Cale's own family missed the clues? Committees were formed. Security protocols were overhauled. Mental health screenings in schools were expanded. But for 9 families, it was all too late. Detective Soraya Klein returned to her office months later and opened a locked drawer. Inside was a single item: a copy of Cale's manifesto, printed and bound in a plain black cover. She flipped to the last page. There, in fine print, Cale had written a single sentence that had gone unnoticed during the investigation. "I wonder if, when it ends, I'll feel real again." It stayed with her, because even though the boy had been captured, the damage he caused could never be undone. His story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that sometimes the greatest threats wear the quietest faces, and in the gray silence of a prison cell, Kyle Brymore finally lived the one reality he hadn't prepared for: being forgotten.